So what do you do when you're playing with the Sullivan family and you show up to a gig and there's already a Sullivan family there and they got Marty Stewart in the band? Well, you may as well just put your head between your legs and kiss your own ass. My first meeting with Marty Stewart was under very strange circumstances and was likely brought on by Margie Sullivan. Back when I was playing with Enoch and Margie, I was I might have been 17 years old at this time, and we went to a bluegrass park. I think it was called the Swanee River Park. I'm pretty sure it was in Florida. I know that much. And there was a strange kind of aura amongst the crew on the way down there. And we were in the bus, which Enoch seldom ever took on the road, but he took the bus this time. And he didn't seem to want to take the bus. I think he would have rather have been in the station wagon. On and on that goes. And it's like, this is kind of weird. And we pulled up to the gig. And we go down this long dirt road into the park, and there's a big pavilion building where this concert's happening, and we pull up, and what's sitting there but a big red and silver 4106 bus that says Jerry and Tammy Sullivan on the side. It was pretty weird, but I kind of figured out years later what happened. Margie and Enoch had sued Jerry numerous times for his use of the words Sullivan family. They had copyrighted it, apparently, and so every time that he went out and tried to work, they would try to stop him. And it turns out that Margie somehow heard about this gig going on and Jerry and Tammy Sullivan being hired. And so without telling anybody, they didn't tell the buyer down there, they didn't tell anybody, they loaded up the fucking bus and drove down there and basically walked in and said, "We're the Sullivan family. That's not the Sullivan family. You've hired the Sullivan family. Here we are." And I wasn't privy to a lot of this, but I found out it happened later, and I was like, it just felt really bizarre. So what ended up happening was we ended up, the promoter was in such a tizzy because of all this that he kind of forced us to share the bill. It was the only thing he could do to make Margie happy, and so we just somehow decided that we're going to share the bill. I don't know, I wasn't part of that conversation either, and I don't think I would have wanted to have been. And so, sure enough, Jerry and Tammy goes on first, and we're to go on second, as if they're opening for us, right? Any way they could demean Jerry at all, that's what they did. So, while we were waiting to go on stage, I saw, Marty there. Marty was there with Jerry, playing with him. And the two girls, who I didn't know at all, were hanging off him like flies. And he was a pretty cool looking dude, He was wearing, super tight jeans and pointy cowboy boots. And he had long, spiky black hair sticking out everywhere, and just an incredible looking dude. And I wasn't all that familiar with his playing abilities. I knew that he had worked with Enoch and Margie in the very beginning. They were the first people that ever worked him. There was a live album made when he was 13 years old and in their band, along with Carl Jackson, who was about 16 at the time, already one of the world's greatest banjo players. But in those days, Marty wasn't a great mandolin player at all. He was actually quite horrible, but he was a kid. He was 13 years old, and he was super cute. And that's what he traded on. He grew into his music as he got older. And then, after a while, he, at 16, I think, years old, or maybe it was, no, I think it might have been 15 or 14 or 15, he got hired by Lester Flatt and went to work for Flatt until Flatt died. And so anyhow, I knew that about him, and I also knew that after Flatt died, he wandered around Nashville for a long time trying to figure out what to do, and ended up working for Johnny Cash, who we also worked with for 7 to 10 years. I don't know how, it was quite a long time, and he married one of John's daughters, Cindy. So I knew all of this, and I was just like, okay, so this guy's here, whatever. And he talked to me, I talked to him, and I didn't know these people at all then. And the two girls were kind of hanging off him, and they went on walking down through the park and asked me to go with them. And I went a little ways with them through the park, but then I thought, Enoch's going to be really pissed off if I hang out with this crew. So I went back into our bus and waited for the show to start. So when it finally did, I got quite a startle. I was standing in the back of the hall when Jerry and Tammy and Marty took the stage. And I don't even remember if Stephanie was playing. I don't even think she was. I can't remember if she was or not. She might have been. As a matter of fact, there might have been this other guy, if I remember correctly, Tammy's husband at the time, Junior, or JR they called him, who was another piano player. I think he might have been playing, but I don't remember for sure because I was too blown away by Jerry and Tammy and Marty. The musicality of what they were doing that night was astounding. And I was in shock. I was like, these are the people that Enoch and Margie hate so bad. What's going on? Like, instantly I knew, well, they probably hate him because these guys are like 10 times better than we are. And there was an excitement, like a lightning in the music that we didn't have. We had it, but it wasn't like what I was seeing from Jerry. And of course, Marty was a star, even though he wasn't a star at that time at all. He hadn't had hillbilly rock or any of those things. He was floating around kind of in a mess. And I didn't know how bad a mess until later on. And God bless Marty. Like I don't have the first thing bad to say about Marty Stewart, but I mean, he ended up in the news a lot, because he had his problems. He had problems with addiction, and he came by them honestly. He was in the wrong line of work for, that type of personality. And as I've said it many times in this series, musicians get trapped into addiction by virtue of just being musicians. And the people that they hang out with and the situations they find themselves in, they get addicted to pills and drugs and alcohol and stuff because it's a way to kill the pain of rejection and failure and all the other shitty things that happen to musicians, right? And like this whole story, 33 episodes of this, is enough to prove that. And it's a wonder that I'm not a complete stoner or dead from addiction. But I just never I don't know. I got lucky, I guess. I just never had the urge to do hard drugs or even smoke weed or any of those things. And I had my share of alcohol. And alcohol caused a problem a few times in my life, but it's never took a hold of me. I'm not, even to this day, I barely drink unless there's company around. I'm not the kind of person that just whips out a beer or anything like that in day-to-day life. I just never saw the point in it. Here was Marty up on stage with Jerry and Tammy, and man, they were just killing it. And so that was my first encounter with Marty. So when I took the job years later with Jerry, and I was stepping into Marty's shoes, that's who I was replacing. He had... Marty became a big part of my life because of this, because he was the producer for the band. He had gone through a lot of crap, you know. He worked for Flatt. Flatt died, left him homeless, kind of, in the business. He kept, trying to do everything he could. He worked with Doc Watson. He worked with all kinds of people. Marty's an incredible musician. And he ended up with cash, got married to Cindy. That marriage apparently was an absolute shit show because they were both addicted. She had addiction problems. He had addiction problems. But you got to remember something, Marty's the kind of guy. I mean, he was hanging out with John Cash, man. Johnny Cash was his friggin' father-in-law. Imagine that, right? And of course, Johnny loved Marty. Everybody loved Marty. Everybody loves Marty now. Marty just got put in the Country Music Hall of Fame. He totally deserves it. But he was dealing with Cash, who would from time to time lose his battle with his addiction demons and go on a big tear. And who would he take with him? Marty. It was Marty getting hey, Marty, come on down to the house. We're going to go do something, and Marty would go. And pills, alcohol, insanity, all kinds of just absolutely crazy, crazy shit. And they told me stories about it. There was one story in particular that I can tell, because I know it was never supposed to be told, but it's probably public knowledge amongst a lot of people, that one day, Johnny was on a tear. He calls Marty, says, we're flying up to Abingdon, Virginia, where I think that's where it was, to see A.P. Carter's grave, I think. I think that's where they had to go quite a ways away. They flew up to wherever he was buried. And they went up there, and by the time they got there, Johnny was shit-faced, drunk, found the grave and took pictures of Johnny sitting on A.P. Carter's grave with a bottle of Jim Beam or Jack Daniels, right? Johnny apparently hated the man for whatever reason. I don't know. And then they just got in the plane and went back home. And just things like that. Johnny getting polluted and getting in his Cadillac and driving down Johnny Cash Boulevard, which is a one-way street, on the wrong side, going the wrong way with Marty's in the car. And the cops pulled him over. And the cops were like, sir, you're going the wrong way down a one-way street and you appear to be inebriated. And Johnny Cash looks out the window at the guy and says, you see that fucking street sign over there? Yeah. Well, this is my goddamn street, and I'll drive any direction I want on it. And they let him go. That was just insanity behind the scenes of all these people. It's just incredibly lucky to be alive. Any of these guys. If you read their autobiographies, it's plain to see that they knew themselves that they were lucky to be alive long enough to write an autobiography. And so Marty was he got to the end of his marriage with Cindy and kind of fell off the wagon, and so he was, in Nashville in an apartment somewhere with no money and having problems with drink and whatever. And he went back to the place where he felt he could get whole again. And so he went to Jerry. That was the person he remembered as being the most spiritually grounded person. And thank God he did, because him going back to Jerry and asking for help, I need help. I'm lost. I need help. And Jerry said, "You're damn right. I'll help you. Let's get you sorted out, right?" And he did. He got Marty sorted out, and it wasn't easy. There was a lot of stories there too about taking Marty out on the road and him messing up and drinking a few bottles of wine or whatever and trying to show up, busting into the place late for the show and plowed out of his mind and getting on stage and falling all over everything, and Jerry and everybody trying to cover for him. And it was a hard time, right? And like I said, I don't mean any of this against Marty Stewart. Marty is a beautiful guy, and I've always loved him. And like I said, it's just one of those things, people don't realize how much strife and pain and loss and all these things are behind that guy that's in front of the stage in the nudie suit, the Manuel coat and the fancy boots and the Clarence White Telecaster and the whatever, whoever it might be. Doesn't have to be Marty. Could insert anybody in that position, right? So that's where it stood. When I got into the band, I immediately started to get exposed to Marty a lot more, and I grew to love this man. He knew he was good. Let me put it that way. He knew he was good, and he was always nice to me, but he always kind of treated me like the young kid who didn't know much. But there were certain things that I would do musically, and he'd look around and go, "Man, do that again," and he'd get me to do it for other people and those kind of things. He was a fan of my playing, but he never truly took me into his confidence. And I can tell you right now, by the end of this chapter of this story, which is, I don't know how many episodes away that is, because it's a long story what happened between me and Jerry Sullivan. He never took me into his confidence, Marty didn't, but he was going to wish he had of. Because by the end of it, it was that lack of a friend, or, like a true friendship between us that caused the collapse of everything. And one of the things, it's not the only thing, but it's one of the things that could have, if Marty had really given me my props and treated me like one of the crew, like I belonged there, which he never really sort of did. He did. I know he felt I belonged there, but he wouldn't tell me. And he played it tough with me all the time, and that was fine, right? He was Marty Stewart, right? What am I going to say to him? So, anyhow, there we were. We were, going out and doing gigs that Marty was involved with. Marty was on tour with Travis Tritt on the No Hats tour, and we had gone and sang on that show a couple of times, and there was, Marty would just find ways to plug Jerry and us into whatever was going on. Plus, there was always recording going on, and there was writing going on. Jerry was always going up to Nashville for a few days to write with Marty, and occasionally Marty would throw me a session gig in Nashville once in a while, right? But I was learning all sorts of things, immediately upon entering into that position, that spot on the stage and the spot in Jerry's, family. And you can't work with people at the level of intimacy that I worked with these people. Like, well, I think I was gonna say normal bands wouldn't be this close, but you know what? That's not true. When you work with people musically for any more than 6 months closely, where you're always together and always playing and always creating, it it blows apart all the barriers. You lose all your privacy is the best way to describe it. Like you can't keep secrets. You just can't. There's things just slip out or come out, or you have to tell somebody something about your own personal life because it's influencing the music, or it's influencing the way that you're dealing with the public or dealing with people in the business or whatever. And people, bandmates, they get there's a level of intimacy between band members that transcends anything. The closest thing I could compare it to would be military people going into war. That's how intense it is to build and create music together with people that you're planning to do it for years and planning to grow what you're doing into a sustainable business model and a sustainable legacy. It's something you just don't consider when you watch music. You just think, oh, that's great music. There's a lot behind it. And the further I went down the rabbit hole with Jerry, after that first audition and the first few months of work, started to find out some things about Jerry Sullivan and that family that were not the best. And so there was a kind of a strange family unit going on there. You had Jerry and Tammy and Stephanie, of course, and then you had Jerry's wife, Zelma. She was a twin. Her twin sister, Bobby, lived right across the front yard in another mobile home. They lived in one mobile home, and she lived in the other by herself. And these two women were inseparable. They were identical twins, and Zelma looked way older than she was. It was weird. I think just the stress of living with Jerry and the stress of life, in the South, working. She worked hard all her life, worked outside all her life. She looked really old, and she suffered from migraines that would put her down for 2 and 3 days. And she was not into church or religion. I think she thought Jerry was completely full of shit, which in a way he was. And she was a no bullshit, smart woman. Everybody loved her because she was a hard ass, but she was a good natured hard ass. You know what I mean? Like she didn't suffer fools, but she just wasn't going to play along with any game. It was just like, oh, okay, oh, that's what you're going to do? Well, here's why you're really doing it. Now piss off. Like, that's how she was. And so that was the general family unit that was going on within Jerry's world. So what started to come out fairly quickly, because I was seeing his daughter, and every day we were spending all of our time together, just about. Things started to creep out. Not only were Stephanie and I together as a couple, but we were also working in the band together, so it was like a double whammy. It was a set of intimacies that were both incredibly deep and separate and different. So one of the things that came out fairly quickly from Stephanie was that, Jerry, at one time, before he really started to take being on the road seriously, which was when Tammy began playing bass and singing lead, right? That's when things really started to pick up for Jerry. Jerry was a rabid, raging, violent alcoholic who beat the living shit out of everybody in that house. There were stories about him, beating the girls with the belt buckle end of the belt and, bloodying them and bloodying Zelma. And just a ravening fucking lunatic when he was drunk. Raging. And part of it was the head injury, right? He just was not right. He wasn't right. But the other part of it was alcohol. And so the people, Zelma wasn't afraid of him, but the girls, they were afraid of Jerry. And it wasn't evident right away. And I never really saw anything right away that was indicative that he was still like that. But they were afraid of him. And it was easy to tell, They just didn't get into arguments with him. And if they did, they walked away really quickly so it would de-escalate, And then, as unfortunately most women that I've known in my life, Stephanie was the victim of sexual assault when she was young. And these, not by Jerry or anybody in the family, but she was still a victim of it. And the person that did it never got caught, or apparently, and just those like that. And that caused strife, with Jerry. It seemed like everything that happened in their lives just caused friction, right? So they had come up really hard. They had seen, by the time I came into that picture, they had seen more than their share of terrifying bullshit. Like just stuff that, it's very similar to what I went through when I was a kid. And so there was a certain level of PTSD among these two girls. Zelma, their mom, she was tougher than that, so she didn't really show it. But again, she did have her migraines, and she stayed to herself. She always was in the bedroom watching TV and relaxing, and she'd come out to cook and hang out once in a while, but they were very somehow unattached, Jerry and Zelma. Although I know Jerry loved her, and she loved him. But there was a lot of water under that bridge. So while all that was going on, I started to fall into a couple of other really cool relationships that changed me forever. Was Jerry's brother, Homer Lee Sullivan, also an uncle to Enoch, right? There was Jerry and Homer Lee and Arthur and the preacher that died at the pulpit, Enoch's father. And so Homer Lee was another one of the Sullivans, directly in that clan, Jerry's brother, who thought the whole load of it was all bullshit too. And he lived off by himself. He was divorced. He lived off by himself in a trailer way back down this dirt road, up in behind Enoch's place, and he kept coon dogs, and he fox hunted for fun, and he was retired, and he had a good pension, and he had a D-28 Martin that he loved that played like shit. I hated it. It sounded good, though. And he was a guy that I just gravitated to because he loved music so much, and particularly fiddle. And he loved my guitar playing because he was a guitar player himself and a good rhythm guitar player for fiddle tunes, but he loved the fiddle. He literally taught me how to play the fiddle. I already was playing the fiddle, but he taught me how to play it like an American. And he did it very simply. He just kept going, you know this tune? You know that tune? I'd say no. He said, well, listen to this. And he put the vinyl on. Listen to that. Listen to Kenny Baker play it. And he loved Kenny Baker. He thought Kenny Baker was God, and Kenny Baker was God. And I spent hours, hundreds of hours at this man's house, eating peaches out of a can, and sitting at the kitchen table, smoking cigarettes and playing the fiddle for Homer Lee. And he'd get so excited, he'd nearly jump up out of his chair when I played something that he loved. He loved music so much, and he had so much influence on what I was choosing to learn. And I remember being at his kitchen table one night, realizing that I had suddenly learned vibrato on the fiddle. That I was suddenly playing the fiddle really, really sweet and long. Out of nowhere, it just started to happen. I was like, wow, all of this playing and listening and playing and listening I just made a huge leap forward in my technique. Didn't say nothing to him, but it didn't have to, because I was playing and he was losing his fucking mind. He was losing his mind. And I knew I was doing good if he was losing his mind. So, and he was a beautiful man. Homer Lee Sullivan was one of the best men I ever knew. He was a lot like Emmett. Him and Emmett got along famously. He and Jerry got along. We got along with Enoch too, but it wasn't that, everybody knew about Enoch and Margie. So, anyhow, the other guy I met along the same time through Homer and through Jerry was an old fiddler up country 10 miles away or so named Chester Knapp. This man was a World War II veteran, fought at Vimy Ridge and survived, of course. And he was a great fiddler. And I'd go up to his house and stay there for hours, and he would play the fiddle for me. And I'd play the fiddle for him. He'd teach me tunes, and he was such a soft-spoken, quiet country guy, And I'd go up in there, and he'd make me instant coffee, and we'd sit there for hours, talking about fiddle, talking about tunes, it's where I learned the Methodist preacher was from Chester and from Homer, I got that tune from them. And another tune called Hollow Poplar, which I have no idea if it came from Chester directly. He didn't know who made it. He never told me that he made it, but he might have. This is the kind of fiddler he was. He played tunes that you'd never heard before, and they just blew your mind. And it was just that old Alabama lick, that type of fiddle music is mesmerizing. So that was the musical world that I was in, and the things that I was learning at the very beginning of this whole thing. As things developed between me and Stephanie, that relationship became closer and closer. Never was really super close friends with Tammy, I don't think, because Tammy, well, that's another chapter, but she was never mean to me. We had fun. We related to each other well. We sang great together. But there was a lot of great music amidst all of this going on. Not only what was being made with the band, but the stuff that I was getting to play with Marty, the stuff I was working with Homer and Chester and some of the other local musicians that were around. And it was a magic time. It was one of those. It was like well, to be honest, it was the calm before the storm, really. Because things happened so quickly that it was a bit difficult to get your head around it. There was so many things going on at once, and it seemed like my entry into the band began a very quick ascent for us through Marty and his connections in Nashville, and the amount of work that we were doing around those types of people, and the heads that we were turning were all those kind of people. Marty, Emmylou Harris was a fan. There was a bunch of other people that we would start to find out were immense fans of what we were doing. And it looked like, at that point, that we couldn't lose, right? You should never think that in this business. I still remember, though, all the gospel music being played, but me and Jerry, when he was first kind of, feeling me out for what I was receptive to musically, he found out I was very interested in frailing the banjo, and I'm telling you, Jerry Sullivan was one of the best drop thumb players that I had ever met. He just had that thing. And he used to make me play the banjo when he was teaching me how to do it right, He used to make me hold an egg in my hand so that my hand would have this shape. That's how you frailed the banjo, with that weird shape in your fist. And I'd have to hold an egg while I was playing. And I ruined my banjo a few times doing it. And he got a hell of a laugh out of it. But he taught me well. He taught me the old style, that old drop thumb, he called it. And I still do it to this day. And I remember the first thing he ever played for me. He said, my father knew how to drop thumb, and my grandfather knew how to drop thumb, and they taught me to do this, And he played me a tune in the old sawmill tuning, he called it, which is something I hadn't heard of to that point. He said it was called "Don't Whoop the Baby," and it had words, and he'd sing them. And I don't remember what they are, but I sure as hell remember the tune. And that great big ham, that ham hock hand, hitting that banjo just as light as a feather. You could his right hand was just dancing on the strings. And it was a part of Jerry, As this story goes forward, this part of my story, these next few chapters, a lot of what I have to say about Jerry and the whole experience I have in that crew is there's some landmines in there for me, things I probably don't want to divulge, because there was a lot of good in Jerry. There was a lot of bad in him too, but there was a lot of good in him, and there was a lot of good in all of those people. And unfortunately, sometimes when you look back, you kind of focus on the bad things sometimes, because you always want to know why things ended the way they did. That's always the question, right? And I've been lucky in my life to have some endings that weren't endings. They were just temporary pauses while everything reset. Most of the time in my favor, most of the time. But I'll never forget Jerry Sullivan playing the banjo. It was one of the things it was like a guilty pleasure he had that he didn't tell anybody about. Because it was secular music, right? And, didn't want to have this famous Alabama Southern gospel, power preacher, running around playing old mountain music on the banjo. That wasn't very Christ-like. But he sure did it anyway. He played me "Don't Whoop the Baby." I think he whooped the baby a few times himself, but don't whoop that baby. Don't whoop the baby.